Before we begin, get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little higher. Let the day fall away from your shoulders, because tonight's story does not take place over years, or even decades. Tonight's story takes 600 years to tell, and we have all night to tell it. If stories like this help you drift off, a quiet like and subscribe genuinely helps. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. There is a legend that intelligence agencies refuse to write down. It appears in fragments, in the burned margins of Cold War dossiers, in the testimony of captured mercenaries who suddenly stop talking mid-sentence, in satellite photographs of mountain fortresses that, on every follow-up pass, are simply gone. The legend describes a man, always the same man, tall, regal, a widow's peak of silver-streaked hair, eyes that one MI6 analyst described as the eyes of something that has watched you from a great distance for a very long time. The legend says this man advised Cannes, that he watched Constantinople fall from a hillside, taking notes, that he walked through plague-emptied London streets in the 1660s, unafraid, because the plague was an old colleague of his, that he has owned banks under 40 different names, that he has funded wars on both sides just to study the outcome, that there are languages he speaks fluently which no living scholar can even identify, because every other speaker has been dead for 400 years. The legend says he cannot die, or rather that he has died many times, and that death, for this man, is not an ending. It is a door he has learned to walk back through. His followers, and they are legion, hidden in every city on earth, do not speak his name aloud. They call him the Demon's Head, in the old tongue, Raz Al Ghul. And here is the strangest part of the legend, the part that sounds like a fairy tale, even next to everything else. They say that this immortal, this ghost of 6 centuries, this man who has outweighted empires, has exactly one weakness, one obsession, one thread he cannot cut. A mortal man. A man in a cape, in a grey and broken city across the ocean. A man the demon could have killed 100 times, and never will. Because in 600 years of searching, he is the only human being Raz Al Ghul has ever looked at and seen an equal. He does not call him Batman. The name means nothing to him. Theatre for criminals and children. He calls him by his true title, the only honest thing about him, detective. So breathe in, slowly, and out, slower still. Lower the lights if you haven't already. Tonight, we go back. Back before Gotham had a name, before the League of Assassins drew its first blood, before the green waters ever glowed in the dark beneath the desert. Back to the 14th century, to a tent on the edge of the Arabian sands, where a child was born under a wandering star, to a tribe that had no idea it had just delivered the longest shadow in human history. This is the complete story of Raz Al Ghul, the Demon's Head, Batman's most ancient enemy. Chapter 1 begins now. The desert at night is the quietest place on earth. If you have never stood in it, it is difficult to describe. A silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat, under a ceiling of stars so dense they look like spilled salt across black cloth. This is the world our story begins in. No cities, no noise, just sand and stars, and the small fires of a nomad tribe moving between wells that only they remember. Somewhere in that tribe, sometime in the 14th century, a boy was born. We do not know the name his mother gave him. That is not an oversight. That is the point. Raz Al Ghul has outlived his own name. In 600 years of stories, in every account he has ever given, including the definitive telling of his origin, the graphic novel Birth of the Demon by Dennis O'Neil, he never speaks it. The boy he was is the first person the demon ever erased. But we know what the boy was like, and he was strange, in the gentlest way. While the other children of the tribe learned the bow and the trade routes, this boy sat for hours watching wounds heal. He marked, in his memory, which herbs eased fever and which did nothing. When an elder died of an illness, the other children grieved and moved on. This boy asked why. Why this sickness? Why this man? Why now? The tribe found him unsettling.
Brilliant children often are. The desert could not hold him. As soon as he was old enough, he walked away from the only world he knew, toward the lights of civilization. And understand what civilization meant in his century. While Europe stumbled through its medieval darkness, the Islamic world was in a golden age. Hospitals in Cairo and Damascus, libraries holding the surviving wisdom of Greece and Rome and Persia and India. Into this world walked a nameless nomad boy with a hungry mind, and the world fed him. He studied medicine, astronomy, alchemy, which in those days was simply chemistry wearing a mystic's robe. He learned to read in 4 languages, then 6. He dissected, he distilled, he questioned. His masters said he had the finest mind they had ever trained. And what is worth holding on to as you drift is what he wanted to do with it. He wanted to heal, not to rule, not to grow rich. The young physician believed, with the burning purity that only the young can sustain, that death itself was just another disease, that suffering was a code that could be broken, that every life, from the sultan to the beggar at the gate, every single life was sacred and worth fighting for. Hold on to that, because the entire tragedy of the next 600 years lives inside that one beautiful idea, and what the world did to it. His genius earned him a place no nomad son had any right to, physician to the royal court of a sultan in a gleaming city at the desert's edge. And it was there, somewhere between the palace and the bazaar, that he met Sora. The accounts of Sora are brief. History rarely makes room for the quiet loves. But we know the physician adored her, that she was, in his own words spoken centuries later, the light of my days. They married, and for a time, a short time, the way deserts get a short season of rain, the man who would become the demon's head was simply happy. A doctor, a husband, a man who healed people in the morning and came home to someone who loved him at night. If the story stopped here, no one would ever have known his name. The world would have been so much kinder if the story had stopped here. It didn't, because the physician's research had begun pulling at a thread. In his readings, in old miners' tales and older scrolls, he found scattered mentions of places in the earth where the sick were lowered and the dying rose. Folk stories, his colleagues said, superstition. But the physician noticed what they didn't. The stories clustered around fault lines, around deep wells, around places where strange vapors rose from cracks in the rock. Whatever it was, it had a geography,
and things with a geography are real. So he searched, and in the desert outside the city, in a cave system the locals avoided, he found it. A pit, sunk deep into living rock, and in the bottom of it, a churning, luminous liquid, green, casting shifting light across the cave walls like sunlight through sick water. It bubbled, it moved, almost as if it were breathing. Every instrument of his science failed to explain it. He recorded its temperature, its smell, its terrible beauty. And he told no one but his notes. He named it for the old stories, a pit of restoration, a pit of return, a Lazarus Pit. He did not dare test it, not yet. Some part of him, the wise part, the part that would not survive what was coming, understood that some doors should be studied for a long time before they are opened. And then the Sultan's son began to die. The prince was, by every account, a vile young man, cruel to servants, casually vicious, the kind of soul that power spoils early. But disease does not check character. A wasting illness took hold of him, and the court physicians failed one by one, and finally the Sultan turned to his brilliant desert-born doctor and made it very simple. Save my son, or join him. The physician tried everything, every medicine, every technique from every tradition he had ever studied. The prince kept sinking. And so, in the end, the healer stood at the edge of his last and most dangerous idea. He had sworn an oath. Every life is sacred, even this one, even a cruel man's life. He had the dying prince carried by night into the desert, down into the cave, into the green glow, and he lowered him into the pit. For a moment, nothing. The waters churned, the light shifted, and then the prince erupted from the surface, screaming. Not in pain, in rage, a howling animal madness, his eyes empty of anything human. The physician's notes, and his nightmares for 6 centuries after, record what happened in the next 60 seconds. Sora had come with her husband that night, and the thing that climbed out of the Lazarus Pit fell upon her. By the time the physician dragged him away, by the time the madness drained out of the prince's eyes and he stood there blinking, healed, fully cured and barely aware of what he'd done, Sora was dead. The light of his days, killed by the life he had just saved. There is a special cruelty in that, the universe answering a man's most sacred belief with the most precise possible wound. He saved every life he could, and this was his payment. But the desert was not finished with him, because when the truth came out, the Sultan faced a choice between justice and blood, and chose blood. His son, a murderer? Unthinkable, unspeakable. So the court spoke something else. The physician had done it, the foreigner, the desert rat with his unnatural pits and potions. The trial was brief because its verdict had been written before it began, and the sentence. I want you to sit with the sentence, because everything that follows in the next 600 years is born in this single night. They did not execute him. Execution would have been mercy, and mercy was not the point. Instead, they built a cage in the open desert. They put the physician inside it, and they put Sora's body in with him. And they left. Days passed. The sun hammered the cage. The desert did what the desert does, and the man inside, the gentleman, the healer, the one who believed every life was sacred, died there. Not his body cruelly persisted, but the man came apart, hour by hour, in that cage, beside his murdered wife, beneath that beautiful indifferent ceiling of stars.
What survived was something new, quieter, colder, patient. He was rescued in the end by a debt of kindness, and the irony is almost too perfect. Years before, the physician had saved a dying old woman, a nobody, a charity case he treated simply because every life was sacred. Her son, a young tribesman named Hugh, had never forgotten. He came in the night, broke the cage, and carried the broken doctor back to the nomad tribes, back to the desert that had birthed him. And there, among his mother's people, the physician healed and planned. He convinced the tribes to follow him, some telling say through his uncle's influence, some say through the sheer gravity the broken man now carried, and he prepared his revenge with the only weapon he had ever mastered: medicine, reversed. The man who had spent his life studying how disease kills now cultivated it, carefully, brilliantly. And he carried his plague into the Sultan's shining city the way he had once carried cures. The city fell. The pestilence ran through the palace like fire through dry grass. And the physician walked through the dying court, untouched, until he found the prince, the murderer, the saved life, and made certain, face to face, that the prince understood exactly who had come for him, and why, before the end. The Sultan's line was erased. The kingdom that had caged a healer with his wife's corpse ceased within a season to exist. And standing in the ruin of it, the tribesman heard the physician speak his new name, the only name he would carry from this night forward across 600 years. Raz Al Ghul, the head of the demon. The healer was dead. The demon had been born. And in the cave outside the dead city, the green waters were still glowing, still churning, still waiting. Because the demon had begun to wonder. The pit had healed a dying man completely, and the only price had been a few minutes of madness. What else could it do? How far could it push back the dark? Could it push back death itself? He was about to find out. And that is chapter 2. Let's stay in the cave a while, down where the green light moves on the walls. When Raz Al Ghul returned to the Lazarus Pit, he returned as a different kind of scientist. The physician had studied the pit to heal. The demon studied it to understand power. And his research, conducted across decades and then centuries, makes him to this day the only true expert on the Lazarus Pits in the entire DC universe. Everything anyone knows, Batman included, they ultimately learned from his trail. Here is what the demon learned. First, the pits are natural. That surprises people. There is no sorcerer who dug them, no demon who blessed them, although, depending on the storyteller, the truth of their origin reaches toward ancient and cosmic places. In the core understanding, a Lazarus pit forms where rare chemical strata deep in the Earth's crust intersect. Unique compounds forced together by geological pressure, pooling in natural wells, usually along ley lines and fault systems. They cannot be manufactured. They cannot be moved. Drain the fluid and carry it away, and it loses its potency with distance and time. The earth makes them where it makes them, mostly in the old places, deserts, mountains, the roots of the world. Second, they are rare, vanishingly rare. Across the entire planet there are only a small handful, and Raz, across 6 centuries, located nearly all of them. He built fortresses over them, monasteries, false mines, whole villages exist. In the high passes of the Himalayas and the empty quarters of the desert, whose only true purpose is to be a wall of human silence
around a glowing green pool. Third, and this is the heart of it, the pits restore. Lower a sick man in, he rises cured. Lower a wounded man in, he rises whole. Burns, blindness, poison, age itself. The waters strip it all away like old paint. An aged man enters, and a man in his prime climbs out. Heart strong, scars gone, decades simply refunded. And in time, Raz discovered the deepest property of all, the one the pits were named for. If you are quick, if the body is fresh, the Lazarus Pit can reach across the line of death itself and pull you back. Lazarus, the man who walked out of his own tomb. But you remember the prince. You remember the screaming. And so we come to the price, because there is always a price, and the Lazarus Pit collects it in two currencies. The first is the madness. Every single time, no exceptions, not in 600 years, a person rises from the pit in a state of homicidal frenzy. Minutes of it, sometimes hours. The body comes back fighting, as if resurrection itself is a violation it cannot forgive. Raz learned to plan for it. Restraints, expendable guards, empty chambers. He has, in his long life, killed people in pit madness whose names he never learned. The League keeps records of them. He has never asked to see the list. The second price is slower, and it is the true horror of the Lazarus Pit. Each immersion returns slightly less of you, not of the body. The body comes back perfect, but the self, the continuity, the soul, whatever word you prefer for the thing that makes you, you, erodes. One immersion you'd never notice. 10, and old friends say your laugh has changed. 100. Raz Al Ghul has used the Lazarus Pits more than any being who has ever lived. Picture it. A man rising from green water in the age of the Black Death. Again as Constantinople burns. Again and the ships are sailing for a new world. Again and there are railroads. Again and there is radio, and the pit light flickers on a face that has not aged a day since the Crusades. Again, again, each time screaming, each time a little less of the physician, a little more of the demon. He has wondered, in his rare, honest moments, sometimes aloud to Batman himself, whether the man who loved Sora exists anymore at all. Whether the pits long ago finished a slow 600-year murder, and the thing that wears his face is simply the residue, the accumulated sediment of resurrections. It is the one question the great detective of the League has never dared fully investigate. And there is one more thing you should know about the pits, a discovery that comes much later in our story, but belongs here, in the dark of this chapter. The pits are not infinite. Each one can be exhausted, burned out by use. And as the centuries wore on, Raz noticed the unthinkable. The waters were weakening. Each resurrection took longer. The healing came back shallower. The forever he had stolen had a bottom to it. He was, in the slowest possible motion, dying. A mortal man facing death makes peace or makes panic. Raz Al Ghul did neither. He made a plan with a horizon measured in centuries, requiring wealth beyond nations, killers beyond counting, and eventually an heir. which senses it is time to tell you how one man, alone in the 14th
century, built the most dangerous organization in the history of the world. The League of Assassins is next. Think for a moment about how empires usually die. Rome took about 500 years to fall, the Mongols barely 200. The empires of Spain and Britain, mighty as they were, a few centuries each, rising and crumbling like sandcastles against the tide of time. Every empire in history shares one fatal flaw. Its founder dies. The vision passes to sons and ministers. The sons quarrel, the ministers steal, and the whole magnificent machine grinds slowly into ruin. Now imagine an empire whose founder never dies. Imagine a single will, a single intelligence, compounding its power year after century, never losing knowledge to succession, never splitting its inheritance. Gold buried in the 14th century, becoming banking shares in the 19th, becoming shell corporations in the 21st. One patient hand moving the pieces the entire time. That is what Ra's al Ghul built, and the blade of that empire is the League of Assassins. The beginning was humble, as all such things are. After the fall of the Sultan's city, Raz had the loyalty of the desert tribes, men bound to him by blood, by awe, and by fear of the man who had killed a kingdom with a fever. But tribesmen age, tribesmen die, and their immortal master noticed something as the first generation of his followers grew old around him. Loyalty, unlike him, did not live forever. It had to be cultivated, manufactured, bred. So Raz stopped recruiting followers and started raising them. Across the centuries, the League built its monasteries in the unmapped places, the Hindu Kush, the empty quarters of Arabia, the islands that appear on no charts. And into those fortresses came children. Orphans of wars the League sometimes started, infants bought, rescued, or simply taken. They were raised knowing exactly one parent, one country, one god, the demon's head. They learned languages before they learned to question. They learned the 16 schools of unarmed combat, the blade, the bow, the garrote, the needle. They learned poisons the way other children learn nursery rhymes. Which root stops a heart? Which powder mimics sleep? Which vapor leaves no trace at all? And above all, they learned the words, the creed that every member of the League can recite from childhood, the sentence that defines the organization's entire existence. The fang that protects the head. That is what the assassins call themselves in the old tongue. The demon's fang. Not an army, not a gang. A fang. A single tooth in the mouth of something vast and mostly unseen. And here is where the story grows darker than most people realize, because the League is not merely skilled. The League is historical. 600 years is a long time to practice. Students of the law have traced the League's fingerprints through the real catastrophes of history. A duke dead in his bath on the eve of a treaty. A general's heart failing the night before a decisive battle. A reformer, a peacemaker, an inventor, each dying at the precise moment their death would tilt the world in a direction the demon preferred. Historians call these things coincidence. The League calls them Tuesdays. Now, the names. Because the halls of those mountain monasteries have produced and sheltered some of the deadliest beings in the entire DC universe. And you will know some of them. There is the Sensei, an ancient master of the killing arts who ran the League's daily operations for generations. A withered man whom even seasoned assassins fear to look at directly. And in some of the darkest tellings, the Sensei is something more than Raz's servant. He is his father, A relationship of such venom that their eventual confrontation, centuries in the making, is one of the most chilling family reunions ever put to a comic page. Imagine despising your father for 600 years. Imagine the patience of that hatred. There is Lady Shiva, widely held to be the single greatest martial artist alive on Earth. A woman who has killed champions simply to test whether they would be interesting. She has served the League when it suited her. Even Raz negotiates with Shiva rather than commands her. And Raz commands everyone. There is David Kane, one of the finest assassins of his generation, who conducted an experiment so cold it disturbs even the League veterans. He raised his own daughter, Cassandra, without language. No words, no writing, nothing, so that her brain would learn body movement as its native tongue. The child could read a man's next strike in the twitch of his shoulder the way you read this sentence. Cassandra Kane would one day escape that monstrous upbringing and flee to Gotham, where she would become Batgirl. Remember that pattern. The League's greatest weapons keep defecting to the detective's side. It is a pattern Raish has noticed too. It keeps him awake, in whatever way immortals fail to sleep. There is Merlin, the Dark Archer. There are the Ubu, the dynasty of giant bodyguards who stand at Raish's shoulder, each one in turn bearing the same name, generation after generation, like a title. The man you see beside the demon's head is never the Ubu his grandfather saw, and is always, somehow, exactly the same. And the empire around the Fang is vaster still. Understand that the assassins are only the League's edge. Behind them stands a financial network grown for 6 centuries. Numbered accounts, hollow corporations, charities that exist only on paper, entire governments that have, without knowing it, borrowed money from a man born before the printing press. Demon-controlled research labs study bioweapons under the names of agricultural institutes. Demon-controlled shipping lines move cargo no customs officer will ever inspect. When Batman, much later in our story, tried to map the full reach of Ra's al Ghul's holdings, even he gave up. The world's greatest detective concluded that the demon's empire could not be fully mapped, only encountered. Which brings us to the question you may already be asking, there in the dark. Why? Why does a man build all this? What does an immortal want? And the answer is the thing that makes Ra's al Ghul unlike every other villain in Gotham's gallery. The Joker wants chaos. Penguin wants money. Bane wants conquest. Ra's al Ghul wants, and this is his own sincere belief, to save the world. You have to see it through his eyes, through 600 years of them. He drank from rivers in the 14th century that no human being alive today would dare touch. He has watched forests that took 10,000 years to grow disappear inside a single generation. He saw the skies above the first coal cities turn the color of dishwater, and he is one of the only beings on Earth old enough to genuinely remember what air used to taste like. To you and me, the Earth's decline is a headline. To Ra's al Ghul, it is a memory, a personal loss, a patient he has watched sicken, decade by decade, at the bedside. And the physician in him, the ghost of the physician, the residue the pits left behind, made a diagnosis. The Earth has an infection. The infection is humanity. Not all of it. Ra's is no nihilist. He loves art and music and genius. He has personally preserved books that would otherwise have vanished from history. Just most of it. The billions. The swarm. And what does a surgeon do with infected tissue? He cuts. That is the League's true purpose.
the long mission beneath all the missions. The assassinations, the wealth, the plagues, the centuries of patience. All of it builds toward one final act of planetary surgery, a culling, scientific and complete, after which a remnant of humanity, selected, worthy, obedient, will live in balance with a healing earth forever, under the guidance of the only man qualified to rule a garden, the gardener who planted it. Genocide, as an act of medicine, the most monstrous idea in Gotham's universe, wearing the face of its most reasonable man. But even a perfect plan has one flaw, and Raish, the great planner, saw it earlier than anyone. The plan needed him, forever. And the pits, as we learned in the dark of the last chapter, were weakening. The demons forever had a crack in it. An empire of 600 years needs an heir, and the search for that heir runs through the demon's own blood, through two daughters, one who would love him almost beyond reason, and one who would swear in the ashes of the 20th century's greatest crime to end him forever. It is time you met the daughters of the demon. Immortality has a cost that no one warns you about. It is not the violence. Raish made peace with violence centuries ago. It is not the guilt. The pits scoured that away long since. It is the outliving. Everyone immortal loves is, from the moment he meets them, already a memory. Friends are seasons. Lovers are weather. Ra's al Ghul has stood at more gravesides than any being who ever lived. And somewhere in those long centuries, he did the arithmetic of the heart and concluded that love, for him, was simply inefficient. And yet, twice, at least twice that the chronicles record, the demon's discipline failed. And from those failures came two daughters. They could not be more different. And between them, they explain everything about who Ra's al Ghul truly is, because nothing reveals a man like what he does to his children. The elder is Nyssa. Her story is told in one of the finest Batman stories ever written, Death and the Maidens by Greg Rucka, and it begins in Russia, near St. Petersburg, in the 18th century. Raz, traveling under one of his 1,000 names, fell in love with a woman there, and from that love came a daughter, Nyssa Radko. And for a while, a long while by mortal measure, Raz was something almost like a father. He was dazzled by her. Nyssa was brilliant, his own restless intelligence looking back at him from a young woman's eyes. He brought her into the work. He taught her the empire. He trusted her as he had trusted no one in living memory, and his living memory was very long. He even granted her the unthinkable, a Lazarus Pit of her own private door out of death. Do you understand what that gift meant from him? Kings had knelt for a single immersion. His daughter received a pit. For decades they worked side by side, and the work is what broke them. Because Nyssa, unlike her father, still owned a conscience the pits had never sanded down. She watched the League's surgeries, the convenient deaths, the engineered famines, the arithmetic of culling, and the sums would not balance for her. They argued, the arguments curdled, and finally Nyssa Radko did what almost no one in 600 years had done to the demon's head. She walked away. Raz let her go. That, in his mind, was mercy. He returned to his work and his centuries, and Nyssa built a quiet life, a family, children in the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. You know what century is coming. I wish I could tell this part differently. When the Holocaust came, when the trains began to run, Nyssa was taken with her family to the camps. And from inside that abyss, the immortal's daughter did something she had sworn never to do. She called out to her father.
She begged the most powerful man on earth, a man with armies of assassins, with wealth beyond nations, a man for whom rescuing her would have been the work of a single evening, to come. He never came. Ra's al Ghul looked at the greatest crime in human history and saw a current of events too significant to interfere with. He let it happen. He let her stay in it. Nissa survived the camps. Her children did not. And the woman who walked out of that darkness understood her father at last completely. Understood that beneath the philosophy and the elegance and the talk of saving the world, there was simply a void where the physician used to be. So she made a vow, and she made it like a true daughter of the demon, not in rage, in patience. She still had her Lazarus Pit. She had centuries. She would study her father's own methods, his own long game, and she would use them to take from him everything. His empire, his other daughter, his life, and his deaths, however long it took. Hold Nissa in your mind. She does not return for a long while, but when she does, she keeps every word of that promise. And now, the younger daughter, the famous one, Talia. Talia al Ghul was born of another of the demon's rare loves, a woman named Melisande, who died. And the manner of her death, at the hands of a killer the League's own world had created, is its own dark tale. The demon raised Talia himself, and he raised her as the answer to a problem. Remember the problem from our last chapter. The pits are failing. The Empire needs an heir. Raz, by now, doubted any heir of random birth could ever be worthy, so he would do what he always did. He would engineer the outcome. Talia was raised to be the bridge, the perfect daughter who would one day be the perfect wife of the perfect successor, and the mother of a dynasty. And credit where it is due, the demon built magnificently. Talia al Ghul grew into one of the most formidable people on the planet. Educated like a Renaissance princess, languages, medicine, business, art. Trained like a League assassin, she can defeat nearly any fighter alive who isn't named Shiva, Cain, or Wayne. She has run the demon's corporations and his death squads with equal grace. She is brilliant, fearless, devastating. And she spent her whole life inside a single cage, her father's love. Because Raz does love Talia, that is the cruelest part. He loves her the way he loves anything, as a masterpiece he made, as an instrument of the plan. And Talia loves him back, with the desperate, defending loyalty of a child who has decided her father must be right, because the alternative is unbearable. Again and again across the decades, we will watch her be torn down the middle, between the demon who raised her and the man she will come to love. The man her father chose for her to love. Because by the latter half of the 20th century, the search for the heir had grown desperate. Raz had tested princes and generals, geniuses and warriors, sons of senators and sons of crime, and every candidate failed. Too weak, too greedy, too small. 600 years of looking, and the demon had begun to believe no worthy heir existed, when the reports began to arrive. From his agents in America, from a grey, corrupt, Gothic city on the eastern coast, a city the League had written off as terminal. Something was happening in Gotham. Criminals, hardened, violent men, were turning themselves into police, babbling about a shadow, a creature, something that moved across rooftops and vanished, that could not be bribed, could not be frightened, could not be found. The agents' reports were apologetic, almost embarrassed. The witnesses, they wrote, describe a giant bat. Raz al Ghul read those reports in a fortress on the far side of the world,
and ordered his agents to look closer. And the closer they looked, the stiller the demon became. This was no creature. This was a man waging a one-person war with flawless tactics, world-class skill, and limitless resources. A man whose self-discipline rivaled the League's finest. A man with a code and the will to hold it against an entire city. 600 years the demon had searched, and there, in the last place on earth he would have looked, in the sickest cell of the sickest city of the dying modern world, something extraordinary had grown. Ra's al Ghul began, quietly, to prepare an examination. And in his mountain fortress, he is said to have spoken the title before he ever spoke to the man. Not the Batman. That is a child's word. He gave him the name that mattered, the name that would echo between them for the rest of their lives. Detective. How Ra's al Ghul unmasked Batman, the test, the proposal, the love story, and the duel in the desert. That is chapter 5, and it begins in the Batcave. Gotham City. Sometime in the modern age, after the Shadow had taken its city back, vigilante and legend, year after year of war. To understand the night Ra's al Ghul entered Batman's life, you must first understand what the Batcave means. It is not a headquarters. It is a confession. It is the one place on Earth where Bruce Wayne does not perform. Not the billionaire's smile, not the creature's snarl. The cave knows everything. The cave is the secret beneath all the other secrets. And in all the world, perhaps 5 living souls have ever been invited into it. So picture the night. Batman descends into his sanctum after patrol, the rumble of the car dying away, the rustle of wings high in the dark. And there is a man standing in his cave, not hiding, not lurking, standing in the warm pool of the work lamp, hands folded behind his back, studying the giant penny and the trophies with the mild interest of a museum patron. Tall, elegant, a green and gold bearing that belongs to no century in particular. Behind him, a mountain of a bodyguard, an Ubu, and as Batman moves, the elegant man turns, unsurprised, unhurried, as though Batman were the one arriving late, and says in flawless, lightly accented English that he is called Ra's al Ghul, and that they have a problem to solve together. His daughter, Talia, has been kidnapped. And so, he adds, almost gently, has Robin. Stop and feel the size of that moment, the way Bruce felt it. A stranger is standing in the Batcave, which means A, stranger knows the cave exists, which means a stranger has penetrated every layer of security the most paranoid man alive could devise, which means, and this is the part that lands like ice water, a stranger knows who is under the mask. Raz confirms it casually, in passing, the way you'd mention the weather. He knows. Of course he knows. He has known for some time. Mr. Wayne. In one entrance, this stranger has done what the Joker, the Riddler, the entire Gotham underworld, and the world's intelligence agencies combined had never done. And he did it, as he would explain with the faint impatience of a teacher, the obvious way. Batman's war requires wonders, vehicles, weapons, chemicals, capital. Wonders cost money. Money leaves trails, not in a year's accounts, perhaps, but across a decade, to an eye trained by 6 centuries of hiding fortunes. The richest men of Gotham were a short list. The ones with the build, the discipline, the wound. A list of 1. The world asked, what is the Batman? Ra's al Ghul asked, what does he buy? and the mystery simply dissolved. And here is a detail the casual fan misses. Talia and Bruce had already met. Months earlier, half a world away, Batman had rescued a striking woman from the clutches of a League renegade. A physician's daughter, she said, beautiful and brilliant and capable, who, in the chaos of that rescue, had saved Batman's life in turn, and kissed him before vanishing. Bruce had not forgotten her. He was not entirely sure he wanted to. That woman was Talia al Ghul, and her meeting with Batman, like so much in this story, may not have been chance at all. So now her father stands in the cave, declaring her kidnapped alongside Robin, and the detective does what the detective does. He works the case. Across continents, the trail bending through League safe houses and desert strongholds. And as he works, the great detective begins to notice the seams. Clues a shade too convenient, resistance a shade too soft. The kidnapping is a stage set, and every clue is a question on an examination. Batman solves the entire scheme, and then, in the final chamber, with Talia at his side and the truth laid bare, he turns on his host and announces it to his face. There was no kidnapping. The demon's head has been testing him. And Ra's al Ghul smiles, because the candidate has scored perfectly. Then comes the offer, the largest offer ever made to a mortal man. Ra's lays it before him without theatre, point by point, like a contract 600 years in the drafting. The League of Assassins, its armies, its secrets, the Empire, wealth beyond any nation, influence in every government on Earth. The Lazarus Pits themselves, life beyond life. And Talia, who loves him, truly, and whom, Ra's observes with a father's terrible precision, Bruce is not indifferent to. All of it, the whole 600-year machine. Ra's al Ghul is old, and the green waters are giving out, and the work must be finished by a worthy hand. He has searched the entire earth across 6 centuries. And I have chosen you, detective. You shall be my heir. Understand, the demon is not flattering him. Ra's al Ghul does not flatter. By his own measure, he is offering Bruce Wayne the throne of the world. And the strange truth is that the offer makes sense. Look at the symmetry, the way Ra's sees it. Both of them forged by loss. A murdered wife, murdered parents. Both genius minds wearing disciplined bodies. Both at war with the corruption of the world. Both, in their own way, trying to heal a sick patient. Ra's looks at the detective and does not see an opponent. He sees the only man alive built to the same blueprint, the son the centuries never gave him. And Bruce Wayne looks back at the only man who ever fully understood him and says no. Because of the cut. Because beneath the empire and the elegance lies the surgery, the culling, the billions dead so the garden can grow. And there, the blueprint breaks. Ra's al Ghul's creed was forged in a desert cage beside his wife's corpse. Most lives are the disease. Bruce Wayne's creed was forged in an alley beside his parents' bodies. Every life is sacred. A creed, though neither of them says it aloud, that is precisely what the young physician believed 600 years ago, before the pit. Batman refuses the throne of the world for the same reason that physician once lowered a cruel prince into glowing water. The demon is being defied by the man he used to be. Raze does not rage. Rage is for mortals. He withdraws, courteous as ever, genuinely, and this is the word, disappointed. But the matter is not closed. To a man with the demon's patience, no is simply a phase of negotiation. There will be persuasion, there will be pressure, and when those fail, there will be the desert. It comes after Reyes pushes too far, schemes that endanger Gotham, a war between the detective and the League across half the world. Until at last, Batman runs the demon to ground, and the two of them face each other under a desert sky with curved blades in their hands. Reyes, with antique courtesy, suggests Batman remove his shirt, let them duel as warriors did when Reyes was young. And there, by torchlight, stripped of cape and shadow, the detective and the demon cross swords. One of the most iconic images in the history of comics, drawn by the legendary Neil Adams, while Talia stands watching the two halves of her heart try to kill each other. A scorpion's sting fells Batman mid-duel, poison flooding him, and the demon's head walks away, believing the matter settled. He should have remembered his own lesson. This one does not stay down. Batman survives the poison, crosses the desert, and comes for Ra's al Ghul one more time. Beaten, burned, half dead, and unbroken. And in that moment, something in the demon's 600-year-old certainty quietly gives way. He has lost the duel that mattered, not of swords, but of wills. From that night forward, the strangest rivalry in fiction settles into its long rhythm. Ra's al Ghul will threaten the world again and again, and somewhere beneath every scheme will flicker the hope that this time the detective will understand and take his place at the demon's right hand. Batman will defeat him again and again, and never once stop mourning the alliance that could have been. They will save each other's lives between attempts to end them, and always, always, Talia between them, loyal to a father she cannot redeem, in love with a man she cannot keep. He never calls him Batman. 600 years of names, and the demon keeps only the true ones. Detective. But disappointment in a being that old does not soften with time. It ferments. And when the demon finally accepted that his heir would never kneel, the schemes that followed were no longer tests. They were sentences, pronounced on a species. The plague years are next. Every villain has a masterpiece. The Joker has his worst jokes. Bane has the broken bat. But Ra's al Ghul does not work in single nights. His masterpieces unfold across years. And tonight we walk through the three greatest: the plague, the harvest, and the theft that turned the Justice League against its own dark night. Begin with Contagion. It started, as the demon's work always starts, invisibly. A man stepped off a flight into Gotham City, feeling slightly feverish. Within days, the hospitals began to fill with something the doctors had no name for, and the name they eventually gave it tells you everything. The Clench. A filovirus, like Ebola's nightmare cousin. Burning fever, the body destroying itself from within. Death in less than 2 days, and a fatality rate that made the plagues of history look gentle. The old sickness, reborn in a modern city of millions. And it was no accident. The Clench was a cultivated strain in the keeping of an apocalyptic sect, the Order of Saint-Dumas. But its lineage traced back through centuries of careful preservation. And behind that preservation, patient as geology, stood the demon's head. The physician who had carried plague into a sultan's city 600 years ago had never stopped perfecting his first masterpiece. Gotham was sealed. Quarantine. Panic in the streets, bodies in the corridors. And Batman, who can defeat any opponent he can hit, faced the one enemy with no jaw to break. He and his allies, Robin, Nightwing, Huntress, Catwoman, Azrael,
raced to trace survivors of an earlier outbreak, hunting antibodies in living blood, while the city died around them. And Robin himself contracted the clench and burned with it, the detective working while his own son's fever climbed. A cure was wrung out of those desperate weeks, barely, and Gotham survived. Thousands did not. And then came the truly chilling discovery. In the scheme called Legacy, Batman followed the clench backward and found the demon waiting at the end of the trail, openly, almost cordially. Gotham had not been the plan. Gotham had been the trial run. Raj Al Ghul had refined the virus, married it to other horrors out of his ancient collection, and prepared its release at the choke points of the entire world. The wells of half a dozen ancient cities, the arteries of civilization his league had spent centuries learning to reach. This was it. Do you see? This was the surgery. The culling the league had existed 600 years to perform. Batman, Oracle's intelligence, and every ally the detective could field fought it at each release point in a race across the world, and stopped the harvest by a margin so thin the chronicles still wince at it. The demon withdrew to his mountains, unrepentant, already revising. To a man with his calendar, a failed apocalypse is a draft. But his greatest scheme required no virus at all, only a safe and the secrets inside it. You must first understand something about Batman. Among gods and aliens and speedsters, the Justice League's only mortal member sat at the table looking at his friends. His friends, he does not use the word loosely, and asks the question only he would ask. What if one of them falls? Mind control, possession, corruption. The League's own history proved it happens. So Batman did the unforgivable, responsible thing. In secret, he authored contingency plans, precise surgical protocols for neutralizing every member of the Justice League, his allies, his friends. Files no one would ever need to see, as long as nothing went wrong. Raj Al Ghul stole them. The story is JLA, Tower of Babel, and what makes it horrifying is the fit of it. Of course, the demon, planner of centuries, would recognize Batman as the only mind on Earth worth plundering. Of course, the contingencies of the world's most careful man would shine to Raj brighter than any weapon. The League's agents breached the protocols, and Raj read his enemy's secret files the way he reads everything, appreciatively. And then, while his assassins stole the bodies of Thomas and Martha Wayne from their graves to shatter the detective's focus, the cruelest feint of his long life, he executed Batman's plans against the Justice League. All of them. At once. One by one, the world's greatest heroes fell to attacks tuned precisely to their natures. Each defeat elegant, personal, authored by their friend. The plans were never meant to kill. Batman builds fail-safes, not executions. But Raj needed only days of their absence. With Earth's protectors neutralized, his true scheme unfolded. A weapon turning the written word itself into noise in the human brain. Language collapsing worldwide. Markets, governments, armies dissolving into babble. The tower of civilization falling, as in the old story the scheme was named for. Babel. The League broke free, barely, together, and shattered the scheme. Raj Al Ghul escaped, as he escapes, into the mountains and the long calendar. The world never learned how close it came. And then came the vote, because the heroes had survived Raj Al Ghul, but they could not survive the authorship. The plans had worked because they were perfect, and they were perfect because Batman knew his friends completely,
had catalogued their weaknesses across years of shared battles, dinners, funerals, trust. Around the table they confronted him, and the Dark Knight, being the Dark Knight, offered no apology. Someone had to plan for the worst. He was the only one who would. And the Justice League voted on his membership, and Batman was expelled from the league he helped found. He turned and left without a word, because the verdict, by his own arithmetic, was just. Sit with what the demon actually accomplished. He lost. Again. The plague failed. Babel fell. The world spun on. And yet, Raj Al Ghul walked away from the tower having done what no other enemy in the Justice League's history ever managed. He made the gods afraid of the detective, and the detective ashamed before the gods. He wounded the only family Bruce Wayne had left, using no weapon but Bruce Wayne's own mind. That is the demon's signature, the calligraphy of 600 years. He kills you with your own sword. Always with your own sword. But every fencer meets, eventually, a blade he taught. And far to the north, in a fortress by a frozen sea, a woman with her father's patience and her own Lazarus Pit decided that the 20th century's unanswered prayer would finally be collected, with interest. Nissa Ratko's long vow is about to come due. The demon's head is going to die. That reckoning is next. Every immortal carries one secret belief, buried deeper than all his fortresses, that the rules are for other people. Ra's al Ghul had died before, of course. Age, wounds, poison, but always with the green water waiting, always with the door left unlocked. 600 years had taught him that death was a tide. It went out, it came back, and the demon's head remained. He had forgotten the first law of his own league. The most dangerous assassin is the one you trained yourself. We return now to Nissa Ratko, the elder daughter, the abandoned one. Decades had passed since the camps. The world had rebuilt itself and called the matter history. But Nissa had a Lazarus Pit, and centuries, and a vow. And in Greg Rucker's Death and the Maidens, the vow comes due. And it comes due like a Ra's al Ghul scheme, because that is the terrible elegance of it. She had learned at his knee. She attacked the way he attacks, not at the body first, but at the heart. Her first target was not Raz, it was Talia. Nissa abducted her half-sister, and what she did next is among the darkest passages in any Batman story. Using her Lazarus Pit, she broke Talia, killing her and resurrecting her again and again, the madness and the erosion doing their slow work, until the devoted daughter's loyalty to her father was burned away and remade into something Nissa could aim. The demon's most faithful soldier, reforged into the blade meant for him. Tell me that is not her father's own calligraphy, killing him with his own sword. And then, with the pieces set, Nissa drew the old man in. There was a final confrontation, the daughter of the 18th century and the father of the 14th. Two immortals with 7 centuries of grievance between them, while Batman himself moved through the same chess game, drawn in by Raz, who, in a twist worthy of him, seemed to know what was coming, and to be arranging his own affairs like a man setting his estate in order. Whether the demon was outplayed at last, or whether he chose the hour of his own checkmate, is a question the story leaves deliciously open. What is not open is the ending. Nissa's blade found him, and this time there was no pit waiting, no contingency, no door left unlocked. The sisters saw to that. Raj al Ghul, physician, demon, builder of the 600-year empire, died, truly died. The body was burned, and in the strangest funeral in comics, Batman stood witness for him, the heir who refused the throne, the only mourner the demon would have wanted, while the leadership of the League and the Empire passed, by the dead man's own design, to his daughters. Even in death, you see, especially in death, Ra's al Ghul was arranging successors. The world's secret history held its breath, and for a few years of published stories, the demon's head stayed dead, which for Gotham is an eternity. Then the whispers began. In The Resurrection of Ra's al Ghul, a saga sprawling across every Bat title, League fanatics began moving across the world, gathering relics, securing the last weakening pits, speaking of the Master's return. Because the demon, of course, had left one final contingency, the one he had been building in plain sight for decades. Not a pit, not a clone, a bloodline. His consciousness, anchored beyond death by ancient means, needed a vessel. Young, strong, and of his own genetic line, the perfect flesh to carry the demon's centuries-old mind into its next age. And there existed by then exactly one candidate. A boy, 10 years old, the grandson of Ra's al Ghul and the son of Batman. Yes, you heard that correctly, and we will meet the boy properly in the next chapter. What matters tonight is the war his existence ignited. The League came for the child, and the entire Bat family rose to meet it. Batman, Robin, Nightwing, the whole house of the detective, fighting across Gotham and the Himalayas to keep the demon's ghost from wearing a child's body. The grandfather's will against the father's love, with the boy's soul as the battlefield. Even Talia, whatever Nissa's Pits had left of her, fought for her son against her father. And that sentence alone tells you everything about how the House of Al Ghul loves. The demon was denied. The detective's family held, and Ra's al Ghul returned instead in a borrowed body. Lesser flesh, a stopgap, diminished, paler, but alive, and already within hours of resurrection, revising the next plan. In the years of stories since, he has died and returned more than once. His body has failed, been renewed, been remade, and every death lands a little softer than it should, because Gotham has learned the lesson by now, and so have we here in the dark. You cannot kill Ra's al Ghul. You can only postpone him. But something genuinely new had entered the equation. For 600 years, the demon's weakness had been the heir he couldn't win. Now, there was a second thread, small, sharp, 10 years old, with his mother's eyes and his father's scowl and his grandfather's swordsmanship. It is time to meet Damian. Of all the long games Ra's al Ghul ever played, the longest was played in a nursery. Go back, years before the demon's death, to the story called Son of the Demon. Batman and Talia, in one of the rare seasons when fate allowed them to stand on the same side, fought together against a common enemy. And in that season, they were, briefly and truly, husband and wife, by the League's own rights. Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul, the detective and the demon's daughter. And from that union, a child was conceived. In the original telling, Talia, fearing what their enemies would do, let Bruce believe the pregnancy was lost and gave the child up. The story drifted out of official continuity for years, a beautiful orphan of a tale, until Grant Morrison reached back, made it canon with a dark new lens, and gave the child his name and his destiny. Damian. Damian Wayne. In Morrison's telling, grown and nurtured by League science, raised in secret by Talia and the League of Assassins, and engineered,
body and education alike, to be the heir his grandfather had always demanded. Consider his childhood, if the word even applies. While other children learned the alphabet, Damian learned anatomy, the killing points first. By 8, he spoke a dozen languages and could defeat grown League assassins. He was given everything the empire of 6 centuries could provide: masters, weapons, doctrine, and exactly one bedtime story, told 1,000 ways. You are the blood of the demon and the bat. You will inherit the world. He killed young. The League does not keep theoretical students. And his mother, Talia, loving him fiercely in the broken way the house of Ghul loves, polished him like a blade meant for a sheath he'd never chosen. Then, at 10 years old, as Morrison's Batman and Son begins, Talia delivered him to Gotham, to a father who had no idea he existed. Imagine that doorbell. Bruce Wayne, the man who plans for everything, presented with a small, scowling, lethally trained boy who folds his arms and announces himself as his son and heir. And Damian arrived awful. Let no one tell you otherwise. Arrogant beyond belief, violent beyond control. Within days, he had fought the current Robin, Tim Drake, nearly killing him out of sheer dynastic jealousy, and decapitated a criminal because, by League arithmetic, why wouldn't you? He was a 10-year-old storm of entitlement and trauma, his grandfather's creed wearing a child's face. The demon's plan, you see, hardly required Damian to betray his father. It only required him to be what he'd been built to be. But the demon's plans have a recurring flaw, 600 years old, and its name is people. Slowly, across years of stories, across the patient kindness of Alfred Pennyworth, across his father's stubborn refusal to give up on him, across the strange, warm gravity of the Bat family, the only family that had ever asked nothing of him, the boy began to choose. Not all at once, inch by inch. The killing stopped. The arrogance remains, let's be honest. It is load-bearing, but it bent toward loyalty. And when Bruce Wayne was lost and Dick Grayson took up the cowl, Damian Wayne put on the red and green and yellow, and the blood of the demon became Robin. Do you feel the symmetry of it? There, at the edge of sleep. Ra's al Ghul spent 600 years and an empire trying to make Batman his heir, and failed. Then his own bloodline, his engineered masterpiece, his vessel, walked into Wayne Manor and became Batman's heir instead. Of all the defeats the detective ever handed the demon, none cuts deeper than this one. Because it wasn't won with a sword or a deduction. It was won the way the physician would have understood 6 centuries ago, with healing. And Race, his grandfather, watches the boy across every story they share, with an expression no artist draws quite the same way twice. Pride, certainly. The blood runs true. The talent is everything he engineered. Contempt, loudly, for the wasted inheritance, the codes, the sentiment. But underneath, if you look, something older and quieter. The boy is young. The demon is patient. Empires have waited centuries for him before. He can wait. He can always wait. We are nearly at the end now, so let the story slow, and let's ask the question this whole night has been circling. The question that makes Ra's al Ghul the most uncomfortable villain in fiction. What if he has a point? Strip away the assassins and the green water, and listen to the demon's actual claims. The earth is finite. Humanity is consuming it faster than it renews. The rivers he drank from as a young man are poison now. He remembers them the way you remember a childhood kitchen. The forests are receding. The seas are rising.
The species he catalogued in his notebooks across 6 centuries are winking out, one by one, like lamps in a great house going dark. Every word of the diagnosis, and notice it is a diagnosis, the physician's habit surviving everything. Every word is true. We read it in our own headlines. Ra's al Ghul is the only Batman villain whose opening argument you might hear at a climate conference. It is the prescription that damns him. Cull the herd, excise billions, save the world by amputating most of the people in it, and then rule the survivors forever, the eternal gardener of a quiet green earth. The horror of Ra's isn't madness. The Joker is madness, and the Joker is easy to refuse. The horror of Ra's is arithmetic. The equation balances. That's what makes your skin crawl. Somewhere in the back of the mind, the math whispers, and the whole moral architecture of civilization exists to answer that whisper with no. And that is why Batman is his perfect enemy, why it had to be the detective of all the souls in 600 years. Because Batman does not refute the demon's data. He cannot. The data is sound. What Batman refuses is the premise underneath it, that lives are units, that people are a quantity. The boy in Crime Alley watched 2 specific, irreplaceable universes end on the pavement and built his entire war on the truth he learned there. Every life is the whole world. You do not balance worlds against each other. You save the one in front of you, and then the next, and you never, ever stop. 2 physicians, 1 patient. The first diagnosis says the disease is humanity. Cut. The second says the disease is despair. Heal. 600 years versus 1 terrible night in an alley, and the alley keeps winning. This is also why, beyond the comics page, Ra's translates so powerfully everywhere he appears. In Batman the Animated Series, David Warner's velvet voice made him a gentleman apocalypse, and that shows the Demon's Quest remains the definitive adaptation of the first test. In Batman Begins, Liam Neeson's Ra's was the man who trained Bruce Wayne, mentor and tempter in one, the League reimagined as Gotham's secret executioner across the centuries. In the Arkham games, his pit-ravaged corpse king looms beneath the city. Every generation rebuilds him because every generation recognizes him. The brilliant elder who looks at the world's sickness and concludes, regretfully, courteously, that you are the tumor. And the final secret, the one this whole night has been keeping, is what Ra's sees when he looks at Batman. Not an enemy, not even an heir. He sees a man who suffered the demon's own origin, the murdered loves, the unbearable injustice, the genius forged in grief, and who walked out of that desert without becoming him. Bruce Wayne is the road not taken, the physician who stayed a physician. When Ra's al Ghul says detective, listen closely. Underneath the respect, there has always been something almost like longing. He cannot decide, after all these centuries, whether he wants to destroy that man or be saved by him. So, let the story set you down gently now, where it found you. Somewhere tonight, in the high, cold mountains where the maps
Go quiet. Green water is glowing in the dark. It bubbles softly, like something breathing. An old man stands at its edge. An old man who is also a young man, who is also more than 600 years old.
And he studies a map of the world the way a surgeon studies a patient he has loved too long and too strangely. He is in no hurry. He was never in a hurry. Sultans hurried, and they are sand. Empires hurried, and they are footnotes. The demon's head endures, and somewhere beneath the centuries and the schemes and the green water's residue, a physician from the desert still keeps two memories the pits have never managed to burn away. A woman named Sora, laughing in a city that no longer exists, and a man in a grey and broken city across the ocean, standing over him in the desert dawn, beaten and poisoned and unbroken. The only soul in 600 years who heard the demon's offer of the whole world and said no. Sleep well. Gotham is guarded. It always is. And the rest of the story will keep until morning. After all, it is kept for 600 years. Good night.